Welcome to the Ladies' Breakfast. Today we have with us Marion Youngquist, and Marion wrote the book Procula. And I'd like to give a little information about Marion. She moved to Wauwatosa from Illinois in 1979. That's when her husband Ted Youngquist became pastor of Mount Zion Lutheran Church. He retired in 1985. Marion has edited the Synod paper for 10 years. She's a correspondent for the Lutheran magazine. She's written plays for the Wauwatosa Playhouse. They enjoy traveling, and there are 4 children, 6 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Let's welcome Marion Youngquist.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning because I know some of you, and we've been well acquainted with Luther Manor, of course, since we came to Wauwatosa in 1979. I'm very happy to share my story with you because I am one of you. We have been retired, and I never expected to write this book. So, I'll tell my little story. I have, of course, attended writing seminars as a writer throughout my years, and at one seminar we were told we could never write a novel until we had written 2 million words. And I think I've written those 2 million between doing some newspaper work and magazine articles and plays and the Synod work and the church writing and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At another seminar, we were told we could not write until we could write about love, food, and death. And I'm happy to report that my book, Procula, has all of those things in it, and there isn't a dirty word. I feel badly that contemporary literature has tried to, writers of contemporary literature seem to think they cannot express themselves without expletives that should be deleted. But anyway, how did I happen to write Procula? We were in Boston in 2000, September, and it was a beautiful fall morning. Our daughter, who lives in Lexington, has 2 children. They were off to school, and she said to her dad and I, "Let's go apple picking." Now, I come from the state of Oregon, where we have luscious fruit, and there's a saying, you can take the girl out of Oregon, but you can't take Oregon out of the girl. And I thought, that's just great. So we went apple picking. We drove about 20 miles north of Boston. And here was a lovely orchard, and there were flowers available, and she picked flowers, and then we picked fall raspberries, and we were having a great time. And we drove back to town about noon, back to Lexington, and she said, "What do you want to do about lunch?" Oh, that sunny, warm day and the blue sky, and I said, "Let's have a picnic." Good. We love picnics. So we went in the deli, and when we walked in the deli, no one was talking to each other. There were about 8 people in there with the clerks, and they were all glum, just plain glum. And I thought, if this is the way Easterners act in supermarkets and grocery stores, I'm glad I live in the Midwest. And so we came out to the car with our purchases, and she put on her cell phone, and it rang. And the minute she answered, she said, "Oh no." She turned around to us and she said, "Steve and the kids are okay." And she said, "We're coming right home." And of course, it was 9/11. The Trade Center had been bombed, or had been hit in New York City. And our son-in-law had worked in downtown Boston. They had emptied the buildings immediately. We were due to go to New York City and catch a cruise to Bermuda. So 2 days later, on the 13th, the morning of the 13th, much against the wishes of our children, we went to New York City because we were to meet friends that night for dinner. And if you know my husband, if he's got an appointment, you don't interfere with it. So we went to Boston, or we went to New York City, and we happened to be booked into the Lutheran Seaman Center, which is a hostel for Lutheran people, and the New York Synod offices are located there, etc. And it happened to be 2 blocks from Union Square, which was at the place where the police had cordoned off all traffic farther south toward the Trade Center. And so we were there in the heart of where the vigils and the memorials were being made, because at Union Square is the statue of Washington, and it's a very historic square. And soon there were candles, flowers, the vigils were being held at night. There were all kinds of memorials being made there. And we participated in those. It was a very solemn time, you can imagine. And we stayed there Thursday, and Friday morning when we woke up, it was raining. It was as if the heavens were crying over that terrible tragedy. And there began to appear all over the walls of the buildings, on kiosks and the subways, these sheets of typing paper with pictures of the missing persons, something about them, their name, loves fishing, it would be Rosa, it would be Harold, Clifford, Akita, all, you know, the whole group of people of all nationalities and races that are in our beloved country. And it was very poignant. They were like white tombstones. And we were very sobered by this. We received word Friday night that, of course, we weren't moving out of New York City on a ship, because the ships were stopped, airplane travel was stopped. So we were bused back to Boston, and we went out to Bermuda on the cruise that we were scheduled to take. The cruise was very somber. There were only about 2/3 of the people able to get there. And on the cruise, I read a book. It was Thomas Cahill's Desire of the Everlasting Hills, which is, he's a historian at Fordham University. He's writing 7 books about key events and people in the civilization, history of civilization. And this one was about Jesus. And he makes a point that Jesus has influenced all of our lives with his example of service. We have the Mother Teresa's, we have the homeless shelters, we have the Salvation Army, we have all kinds of people involved in helping others because of the example of Jesus. And this was very meaningful to me. I came home and I read a book about Pontius Pilate from the Wauwatosa Library. And these 2 books rekindled immediately my desire to write the novel about Pilate's wife, Procula. When I was a child, being in a good Lutheran home, we observed Lent. And sometime, always during Lent, my mother would say, with a twinkle in her eye, Pilate should have listened to his wife, and he would have saved himself a lot of trouble. Who was this woman? We only know 4 things about her from one verse in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 27, verse 19. And it is that she's probably a Roman. She was Pilate's wife. She had bad dreams. She warned, knew Jesus was a holy man, and she warned her husband not to have anything to do with him. Her name Procula comes from historical sources because people like Anne Rowe, who wrote the book about Pontius Pilate, and it's really a scholarly study, did research, and this is her traditional name. She is a saint in the Greek Orthodox Church and is honored by the Coptic Church, one of the oldest Christian churches in the world, which is in Egypt. And so I thought, if I were to die tomorrow, what kind of a regret would I have? Here were 3,000 people in New York City whose life was lost immediately. And there were many things they must have missed doing. And it came back to me. I wish I would have written that book that I've always thought about since I was a little girl. So about 3 weeks later, I started it. I didn't have any outline. I didn't know whether I could have energy enough to finish it. I didn't know where it was going, but I knew I had to try to write it. And so I started, and I started with the second most dramatic incident to me in the New Testament, which is the beheading of John the Baptist. I have her there. I wrote about 3 or 4 pages, worked off and on for about a week, and it dawned on me I really didn't know what I was writing about. So at that point, I decided to research, and I love research. I probably have enough facts that are immaterial and a little useless to anyone in my head, but it's fun to have them up there. And I did that with Procula. I started researching to see what Roman life was like and how she might have fit into Roman life, and it became absolutely fascinating. I have just grown to love Roman history because it's so contemporary. There's nothing happening today that didn't happen in the Roman Empire. The wars, the political situation, even in the Roman times, Parthia, which is now Iraq, could never be conquered by the Romans. There were problems with immigration. There were economic problems. There were all kinds of things that are very, very similar. So I did my research, and gradually the story came to me. And so I finished it, and then it was the decision to try and get it published. I didn't know if it was good enough to be published. And so rejection is part of the writer's game. That really doesn't bother me. But it did take about 2.5 years before a publisher picked it up. And I didn't work at it constantly. You know, I'd send out letters of inquiry and get rejections, and then I'd put it aside and think, oh, I'm not going to do anything with it. It's been fun to write. And then I'd send out, 2 or 3 months go by, and then I'd send out some more letters. And finally, there was this publisher in Kentucky, Drury's Publishing, and he publishes a variety of things. I sent him a story for one of his anthologies. And he picked it up, And when the anthology came, I thumbed through it and I thought, I wonder if he would be interested in my novel. So I sent him an email. And in 2 hours, and this is what the email said, you know, thank you for taking my story. I've written a novel. I've written a novel about Pilot's wife. I'm easy to work with. Are you interested? And he wrote back in about 2 hours, and he said, send me the manuscript. And from then on, we worked at getting it published. So that's my little story. I want to emphasize that I am 82, will be in June, and I would like to inspire any of you who have unresolved wishes. If you want to climb Mount Everest, go ahead. I would like to speak to more young people, because I think that we live in a time when there's a great deal of hesitation about the future, a great deal of discouragement about life in general, perhaps a cynicism about life. We've been blessed by a gracious God to live this long, and I would like for people to know that hope is always there. We should never give up on the opportunity to live life to the fullest. So I will read a couple of little sections of Procula. I have Procula in my story, and the book is, of course, concerns her. She is orphaned, and she's taken to Rome by her wealthy uncle and aunt to live in their household, much against her wishes. Everything that in the book about her is really out of my imagination, but there's a great many facts about Pilate, and those are true. We know a lot about Pilate. I think he's given a bum rap myself. He was a successful administrator because he lasted 10 years in Judea. And he would not have lasted that long as the emperor's representative prefect if he hadn't been an able administrator. Caesar Augustus organized an excellent civil service system in the Roman Empire. And under him, the governing agents, the prefects in the different territories and provinces, were closely watched so they wouldn't have their hand in the till. He kept his civil servants, tried to keep them honest. And if there was any question, they were yanked immediately. So Pilate must have been a fairly able administrator to last a decade. He was a prefect under Emperor Tiberius. Well, what about Procula? She comes as a little girl to her uncle and aunt's house. And in that wealthy home, of course, there's a steward to manage finances, etc. And he befriends Procula, and he realizes when she gets to be about 14 that she's very vulnerable in this household where there's a couple of male cousins and people are coming and going. And so he suggests to her that she should have a slave, partially as protection, partially to help. And she rebels a little bit because she thinks she's old enough to take care of herself. But finally, he persuades her, and then she has to ask her aunt for a slave. And she knows who she wants because she's seen a little waif in the rug seller's shop. And the rug seller has not been kind to her. She's one of the children who labors at tying knots on rugs. And so she tells Lucius, the steward, she wants this little girl for his slave. And Lucius finally goes with her and arranges for the sale of this little girl. And so this is when they're starting for Procula's home. And her aunt, of course, doesn't know that this little child is coming. She wouldn't think of her as a good slave. Once outside the merchant shop, I took her hand. She grasped it so tightly and clung so closely to my side that I knew we were bound together forever. I turned to Lucius and said, "I didn't ask her name." Lucius replied, "You own her now. You can call her by any name you wish." I turned to her. "Your name? What's your name?" A small smile flickered across her brown face, and her eyes shone with happiness. She held my hand even tighter. "Tum est," she grinned, meaning "it is yours" in Latin. How odd that she referred to herself as an it, as if she had no name. I started to repeat, "Tum." She nodded brightly. So we called her Tum, and she became mine. Tum leaned against me in the litter. Lucius and I planned to sneak her into Domen Fontana before Zia Terentia, that's her aunt, saw her. Tum was unkempt, with matted black hair and grimy bare feet. Her hands were clean, so that she wouldn't smudge rug wool. The Romans believed that the good life started with cleanliness. Neither my aunt or uncle ever missed their daily trips to the public natoriums. Even the slaves took frequent baths. Lucius and I went off to the mid-morning when Zia Terentius would be at the Venus bath. It would be a good time to bring Tum home. However, our plans were spoiled. Zia Terentia had developed a headache, an ailment that had occurred more frequently in the last few months. She was resting in the atrium and wanted to see me immediately. At the sight of Tum, she turned away in disgust. "Really, Lucius, what is wrong with you? You certainly could do better than that, even for Procula. Even she needs something more than that trash." I glanced down at Tum because she was trembling. I knew then how intelligent she was. Small as she understood every word of Zia Terentius' outburst. I started to protest, but Lucius interrupted. "Oh, kind mater," he said smoothly. "She came with the finest rug that Procula could buy today." Zia Terentius sat up straighter. "Procula brought a rug?" "And one so beautiful," I murmured. "The softest blues and reds with a fanciful design of flowers and birds." My aunt faced Lucius. "Why didn't you buy one for me? Surely my bedroom needs a new rug too." Lucius bowed. "I'll find one for you tomorrow." "I'll offer a prayer at Fortune Virilis that you may find a way to conceal her defects," Zia Terentius said. With a wave of her hand, Tum and I were dismissed. We were amused by Zia Terentius' solution. She was a vain woman and religious in many ways. She vacillated between the shrine of the Egyptian goddess Isis and the worship of the great Mother Sybil. Then she returned to the temple of Fortuna Virilis when she discovered a few wrinkles. She had great faith that the goddess there might disclose how her defects could be disguised from others, especially men. Within an hour, Tum was bathed. It was hard to get her out of the pool and into a clean tunic. Somehow, Lucius produced soft wool slippers, and she twirled around with the first laughter I'd heard from her. Her beautiful eyes grew wide to see golden peaches and roast lamb at the evening meal. We ate together in my room. She insisted on peeling my peach, which she did deftly, and I decided I was mistaken about her age. She was possibly as old as 10. Her small, wiry frame only made her look younger. Finally, Lucius had lit the lamp for the evening. and had a blanket and pallet there for Tomb. I put the pallet alongside my bed and motioned for her to lie down. She shook her head and dragged the pallet to the doorway. She put it across the entrance and pulled a blanket around her, smiling at the softness from the weaver's loom. She meant to protect me from any intruder. I was happy with her joy over small things that I took for granted: good food, clean clothes, a warm blanket. I also realized that I had a true slave. She meant to care for me. Maybe my disturbing dreams would fade with her close by. I smiled to myself. I couldn't get out of my room without disturbing her. In a faint way, I was Tomb's prisoner. The other brief section that I'll read, one of the things that a historical novelist has to decide is what incidents, what true happenings will she or he decide to use. There are so many, so many incidents, so many stories to choose from. And of course, as I said in the beginning, I think the story of John the Baptist is one of the most dramatic in the New Testament, right next to the crucifixion of Jesus, because these were both very public events. And so in my book, I have Pilate and Procula going with their entourage to the fortress, the Black Fortress, which is in the territory of Herod Antipas in Perea. Herod Antipas rules both Galilee and Perea. Those are divided territories. The great territory of the cities of the Decapolis are between those two sections of land. And there's a big banquet to celebrate the emperor's 15th year, and so of reign. And so Pilate and Procula are there to join in the festivities. Pilate is called away, and so he's not in the dining room with Procula. So she's alone and is observing the people around her. She's not very comfortable because Herod Antipas, Herodias, his wife, is known to be a very vain woman, and Procula has the sensibility that she doesn't want to offend her host or her host's wife. She certainly doesn't want to appear more beautiful than Herodias. So Procula has seen John the Baptist once before when she was out on a tour with Pilate, and they see him preaching at the River Jordan. And so she's faintly acquainted with who he is. So she says, remembers, that afternoon was farthest from my mind when a few months later Pilate received an official invitation from Herod Antipas to a state banquet at the Machaerus Palace. It was a double celebration, Antipas' birthday and the 15th year of Tiberius' reign. I was excited to see the Black Fortress, as it was called, because of its history. Many centuries old and located in Perea, deep in the mountains east of the Dead Sea, it was rebuilt by Herod the Great. Often Pilate studied maps, commented how easily Antipas could threaten Judea's northern and eastern borders. Pilate couldn't refuse the invitation, but he prepared carefully. He took extra troops with him, using the excuse that the mountain terrain demanded more personnel. I heard that Herod's wife was vain, like Zia Terentia. No one dared be more beautiful than Herodias. I remembered my aunt's sparkling rings and wondered if Herodias wore 2 handfuls. Pilate called my worries foolish. Just have Tomb do your hair. with a circle of orange blossoms on top, and you'll be the most regal one there. I'll have to keep you away from old Antipas. He may want to grab you too, he said, and hugged me. I sat in the great hall, admiring the golden frieze, carved doors and columns. Tom stood behind me to check quietly on what I was served. Would Antipas dare poison the wife of the prefect? He could offer his young stepdaughter Salome as a replacement. That would be a political union to cement relations between Galilee and Judea. Antipas kept signaling for glasses to be refilled. Meanwhile, Herodias clapped her hands and ordered entertainment. Smiling, she pushed Salome forward to dance. As an honored guest, I had to appear appreciative, even enthusiastic, at the sad spectacle of a dancer without talent. Antipas grew more angry, more tipsy, and ordered the musicians, "Shrey!" Salome juggled her finger bells, missing the drummer's beat. Awkwardly, she shuffled to mime a story. When her exotic mask slipped and her scarlet veil fell from her shoulders, Antipas applauded gleefully, so the guests clapped too. "Shteek, shteek, shwat, shwant of my kingdom," he drunkenly shouted to Salome. Antipas, Salome, and Herodias whispered together as the guests anticipated the meal. The aroma prepared us for roast lamb and orzo. Crystal bowls held tomatoes and olives. Sweet figs and pears nestled on silver plates. I saw an aide of Antipas and some soldiers leave the room. Was it time for Pilate to appear and the ceremony to begin? I slipped out on the balcony for fresh air to brace myself for the charade of two rivals meeting each other. When I came back, I found fresh trays of sweets. I had just taken a few grapes when the chaos started. The musicians lifted their trumpets. I expected a warm and special greeting. Instead, a servant came in with a huge silver platter on which rested the head of the prophet, John the Baptist, his dead eyes glaring as wildly as they had at the River Jordan. I screamed and fainted, and many others did too. Herodias rushed out, followed by Antipas, drunk and unsteady, held up by two guards. Their welcome ceremony for Pilate never took place. Wisely, Pilate decided on an early departure the next day. I took back to Caesarea a recurring nightmare of a bloodied head on a silver platter. So, that gives you a little flavor of my writing. We do have my books. I'll back up. My books are available on Amazon.com, both as an e-book for reading on a Palm Pilot and in printed form. They're also available on the Barnes & Noble website, and of course locally from the Little Red Bookstore. They've been very kind, and they've had good success with it and had to reorder. I'm happy to report that I have another book coming out, probably early May. It's a smaller book, a book of short stories that are interrelated and all take place in the town of Whittemore, a fictional town somewhere in the United States. A friend has called it an old-fashioned novel with chapter headings. I think of it as a book of contemporary short stories. I'll be very interested to know how readers respond to it, since it's the complete opposite of Procula. I do have hopes for doing another novel, but we have been busy, and I haven't had that block of time to keep the tone of a novel flowing. So I've been working on other short stories and poems in between. My husband is very kind and will handle any orders. You can, if you want to, place an order today, or he has books here to sell from the Little Red Bookstore. And it is, they run, I think, $31.46 with the tax. So we'll be happy to take care of you with the books, or if there's anyone who would like to come up and talk to me and ask any questions, I'll be happy to talk with you. So thank you very much for entertaining me and having me this morning.